Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Well, welcome everybody. We have finished up a pretty heavy podcast this past week with the Matsons, and we're going to lighten it up today as we move into all things movie and entertainment and worldviews. And what I want to do is begin with the question of Josh and Marianne. What would make your top 3 or 4 movies? I'm not going to ask your favorite because that's just wrong. I can't think that way, so I can't ask it in that question in that way. But what would be some of your favorite movies of all time?
You can't go wrong with Shawshank Redemption. That's one of those movies, no matter where it is in the movie, if you're flipping through and you're trying to figure out what's on TV, you don't have anything to watch. If that movie is on, I'm tuning in most of the time.
I'm with you. And that is, by the way, the definition of a good movie, is it doesn't matter where it is, you can jump into it. I'll toss in another one with that, A Few Good Men.
I'm going, these are my 3. They're in the top 10. So I'm not going to rank them. I just can't. So Notebook, because, well, I'm a woman and that's a great movie. Sound of Music.
Oh.
Hills are alive.
Yes, they are. The hills are alive. And I'm going to say this, Top Gun. Top Gun is one of my favorites.
Man,
I almost said Top Gun.
Marianne, 2 out of your 3 would be my wife's too. She's a big Sound of Music and Top Gun. And I think we're both interested in the new Top Gun movie at some point.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, I'm going to throw another question out then, since we're talking movies. If someone were to make a movie about your life, Marianne, who is going to play you in this movie? Same question is coming to you, Ron.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this beforehand, and I'm going to shift my answer a little bit. I am a musical queen, and the movie about my life would be a musical. Okay, it would be. So I'm going to say Amanda Seyfried, who, do y'all know who that is? She was in Mamma Mia.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, the girl who plays the Mamma Mia girl. Okay, she sings really good. She's blonde. I'm blonde. And I think she would play a really fun, crazy version of me in the musical that is my life.
I can see
That's
that.
funny. I've pulled her up. I'm looking at the image. I can see that. Josh, it's interesting. I'll tell you who I would like it to be versus who I hear people occasionally tell me I look like. And when you travel to other countries, people start telling you and equating you to other people on movies. But if I were picking one, I would pick Harrison Ford. That's who I would pick. That would be pre-beard, or I've seen him in a couple of times with beard. I think he could pull me off and make me look 10 times better than I really am, obviously. But the one that people often will pick out for me, especially pre-beard days, is that I look a lot like Will Ferrell.
Oh, my goodness. That would be a warped movie. Will Ferrell trying to play Ron Hunter.
I totally get it, but they just say, hey, I look, and I don't know. I've had more than one person over 10 years, the last 10 years, tell me that. I don't see it, but I get that comment quite a bit.
I'm going to get you the cowbell app. Next time somebody says that, you can just break out that app. For me, when I was younger, back in my younger days, I did have a resemblance to Michael J. Fox before I wore glasses, like when I was younger. I know you cannot see all that now.
I can see that.
Much as I would like to say like Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp, it's not happening. I'm probably more of like Jeff Goldblum.
Oh my goodness.
A little quirky. I can see some resemblance there. Yeah, that would probably, unfortunately, that'd probably who would play me.
Well, you know what? Josh, you're in ministry. Mary Ann, you and your husband are in ministry there in the local church. Josh's wife is in ministry, obviously working for Randall House and D6 Family Ministry. I'm in the same area working for Randall House and D6 Family Ministry. But the person we're interviewing today, Paul Asay, he has the privilege of being a movie review critic, and specifically from a Christian worldview standpoint. That sounds all fun. I mean, I would love to go out and watch movies for free. In fact, one of my other interests in life, if I could do it, would be a restaurant critic. Imagine going around and eating. I mean, one of my favorite things, and reviewing food and so forth. But remember, we've got to eat things we don't normally eat. And in Paul's case, he's got to watch all kinds of movies. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, you know what? I don't care how much that pays. If I've got to watch a scary movie, I'm out. I don't know about you, but even as a man, I'm like totally ready to turn off all scary movies, because I would have to sleep with the light on if I saw any of the scary movies out there. Is there a category or genre of movies that you don't care for? Not your favorite?
We don't watch nudity. I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. That's just something we really guard in our house. And that's just not something we just want to pay to watch. I have a hard time hearing certain words. Yeah. There are just certain words that I'm just like, I don't want to sit through this. It's just, they were unnecessary. But I'm also with you, Ron. I deal with fear as it is. And the last thing I need to be thinking about when I crawl in my bed at night is the boogeyman underneath my bed.
I'm with you. Josh?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of any scary movies, haunted houses, anything dark like that. Just, I don't like it. And I know my people make fun of me, but I can't stand to watch anybody like even kiss on TV or anything. Like, I'm a pastor. Like, even when I do weddings, it is the most uncomfortable thing for me. Really? I have to look down and look around. And I have friends that mess with me and will send me pictures of people almost kissing, like real close, just to like mess with me. But no,
because they know that about you.
They know that about me. I wish they didn't, but yeah. So that's.
Hey, Mary Ann, let's go out and Google people almost kissing Nike shoes and send them to Josh. Let's combine his sneaker with his kissing thing and really mess up his world.
Moving right along.
Okay, we will go further. Well, we know what we don't like. However, Paul is going to walk us through ways to look at movies in ways that we might, or in categories we might not would think about. And what I'd love for us to do is realize there are a ton of resources out there, and Paul is from Plugged In. But another area for resources that you can go to is our D6 Family app. Mm-hmm. So you might want to look at checking out our D6 Family app, downloading it. There is on that app a ton of free resources. For example, if you're sitting in a movie and it's not yet begun and you can have small talk, you break out that Family Questions app. And inside there, you can ask the family fun questions inside the D6 Family app and pass the time enjoying your family. You can also connect to our blog. You can connect back to this podcast. It's a wonderful, wonderful area. So Paul is going to talk to us about movies on the other side of this commercial break. And then Mary Ann, Josh, and I are going to kind of critique this, analyze this with you, and talk about how this makes a difference for us.
Just for fun, let's jump in a DeLorean and travel back to the past. Now, back in my early teenage years, and we're talking late 90s, not 1955, but in the late 90s, if you wanted to know if a movie was any good, you had two choices. You could read a review in a newspaper, or you could ask someone who saw it. If you wanted to know what kind of content was in the movie, your choices were really limited. You could try to find someone who saw the film, or you could be like my mom and call the theater and ask an employee what was in the movie, which was very embarrassing. Thank you, Mortal Kombat. But thanks to the power of the internet, all of that has changed, and we now have sites like Rotten Tomatoes and one of my personal favorites, Plugged In, to tell us all that we need to know. And speaking of Plugged In, today I'm joined by Paul Asay. a senior associate editor at Plugged In who has reviewed more movies than I have even seen. Paul, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and good job, David's mom. I'm very impressed.
Oh, yeah, that was always a lot of fun when I have to go tell my friends, yeah, my mom called the theater and they said blah, blah, blah. Thanks for being here today. I'm really excited about this interview. I'm excited that in 2 years they're going to do a live action remake of our interview, and then in 5 years they can reboot the interview with different people and replacing us. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hope that the next version of George Clooney plays me for this, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
You and me both. Well, Paul, it would be far too simple to call you a movie reviewer because you do so much more than that, and your work is so much more extensive than that. Can you take us through what you do and how you do it?
You bet. It is a strange job. What we do at Plugged In is we really look at movies we look through them through three separate lenses, essentially. We look at them as a regular movie reviewer would. Is the movie any good or not? We also look at them through a Christian perspective. What kind of messages do they have? And then we also deal with our primary audience are moms and dads who are looking for what is appropriate for their kids or their teens. That sort of branches out, but we are really concerned with exactly what your mom was concerned with. Is there too much blood? Is there lots of swearing? Is there way too much sexual content? So those are things that we sort of unpack for our readers in our reviews, and it can be a pretty thorough process.
I've always kind of been curious, like how you do this. Like, do you go in the theater and like you've got a little clicker and like every time they say a certain bad word, you just click it and you can tell people how many, or because your job is different from somebody that does a review for the New York Times. So what is it actually like sitting in that theater, and now maybe it's sitting on the couch at home where you have access to like rewind and pause and things like that. But what's the practical side of that?
Yeah. So when we actually are allowed to go into theaters, I've seen 2 movies actually in theaters since the COVID situation began. So it really is a lot of doing it at home, and being able to rewind with your screeners and all that sort of stuff makes it a lot easier. But in normal times, what I typically do, I have a really cool light up pen. You twist it and there's a little flashlight at the very end, a tiny, tiny flashlight. And normally the screeners that I go to are private screenings, they're review screenings. So I'm not into, I'm always deathly afraid of disturbing somebody who's actually paid to go to the movie. But so most of the times it's other reviewers around me, that type of thing. But I sit down and I have a pad of paper, and then I have another pad actually that I mark down the swear words. So I write down everything that happens in a movie, talk a little bit about, if someone has a reference to God, be it bad or good, I note the violent content, the sexual content, and then I have a little cheat sheet, like a swear word cheat sheet, where I essentially just do exactly what you were saying. Essentially, I just tick off all the swear words. That's got to be the weirdest part of my job, just calculating the swear words. There was, I did not review Wolf of Wall Street, but I know a friend who nearly had to go to the hospital after reviewing that movie because he counted like 500, 600 F words in that movie. And so you just wind up taking a lot of content off. In my case, it's a little trickier even because I have terrible handwriting, right? And even though you have this light up pen, you're watching the screen. You're not necessarily watching how you're writing. So I get back from the movie and I can read maybe every third word of my own notes. So I pretty much have to sort of take it from context, where it is in the movie that I wrote this. I can usually see like one word and I think, oh yeah, that's what happened. So you're sort of relying as much on your memory as you are on your notes, but I still take the notes because they help jog the memory.
Well, our listeners might recognize Paul's name as he's written multiple books, including my favorite, God on the Streets of Gotham, a Batman book. And he's written for almost, I think, every one of our D6 magazines. I looked going back to 2013. So you've been a great friend for our company for a long time.
Wow.
And, yeah.
I didn't even realize that I had written that much for you guys.
Yeah. Now, you've been part of Plugged In. Has it been since 2007?
That is correct. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So a long time. Well, over the past 14 years, have you noticed a shift in the messages that are coming out of Hollywood?
That is a really good question. And I would say it really goes all over the board. Let me back up and say that you're a child of the 90s. I'm a child of the 80s. And ironically, I think that a lot of movies targeted toward teens, like the high schoolers, the junior high kids that I was way back then, they're actually a little bit better than they were back in my day. I think that there was a lot more irresponsible behavior when I was a kid on the movie screen. And I think now you see teens that tend to have just better messages. Over the last 14 years, I think that I have noticed a trend toward more problems. I think more content problems. I think that you just see a trend toward crasser entertainment, if you will, and I think that just sort of reflects culture at large. You see that people in back in my day, the idea of cursing on TV or whatnot, that was sort of not thought of. Now, because language is such a part of our culture, bad language is very much more predominant. I think you just hear more of it in movies too. I think that there are less safeguards, I think, for that problematic behavior, and there's an understanding and I think a misunderstanding by Hollywood that kids are exposed to this stuff anyway. So why not put it up on screen? So I guess that would be my primary thing that I've noticed. There's a whole bunch of trends and they seem to go in 5 or 6 years cycles. But I think overall that would be a trend that I've noticed.
Well, you mentioned those safeguards. As Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changing. And it wasn't that long ago that to see movies, you really either had to buy a ticket or you had to drive to Blockbuster on a Friday night. And it really took effort to find graphic violence or nudity. Yet today that access is right at our fingertips, and things like violence and nudity basically find us. So talking practically, what are some safeguards that families can put into place to prevent young eyes from seeing what they don't need to see or young ears from hearing what they don't need to hear?
You bet. It is really tricky. I've got to be honest with you. Being a parent today is very, very hard because, again, back in my day, there was one TV. We had one TV on our house, and that was it. Today you have every kid has their own cell phone. They have often computers in their own rooms, that type of thing. So you have a lot more access to these problematic areas. And I think you can get software that helps protect your family from certain from certain elements getting into your house via the computer, whatnot. I would definitely advise that parents restrict as much as they can, keep the major screens in the house in public viewing areas, the living room, the family room, TVs. Kids should not have TVs in their own rooms. You should probably have just one centralized computer, ideally, if you can. But honestly, I think that the biggest safeguard that you can have as a parent is just having a great line of communication with your children. Studies show again and again and again, that your children are being influenced by a whole bunch of different influences. You have their friends, you have their teachers, you have the entertainment, obviously. But studies show that the biggest influence always in a child's life is your mom and dad. And that is even when they're teens and they don't seem like they're listening to you at all. You're still the biggest influence in their lives. And so because of that, talk with your children as much as you can about what they see, about what they hear. Talk about the entertainment when it's possible. Sit down and watch these shows, these movies with them, and engage them in conversations, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, lessons that you can draw from some of these movies or television shows, because there are always great talking points, I think, in almost everything that you see. Be willing to engage with your children. It's so important just to keep those lines of communication open.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Paul a little bit more about how we should watch these movies.
D6 curriculum is centered on the discipleship philosophy found in Deuteronomy 6, that parents and grandparents should be primary in the discipleship of their children. To accomplish this, D6 curriculum aligns every age in church on the same biblical passage or topic. Family alignment serves as a catalyst for parents to have conversations with their children about faith in the home. D6 also provides many other tools to help parents and grandparents. Learn how D6 curriculum can empower parents in your ministry at d6family.com.
Well, we are back with Paul Asay, and we're discussing movies. Now, Paul, on a previous podcast, we had talked to Elisa Childers, and she had talked about how she had taken her daughter to see Frozen 2, and she had basically been teaching her daughter about a lot of different things. And she said her young daughter was able to point out pantheism within the first few minutes of the movie. So I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. So thinking about all this, the easy question would be to ask you what parents should or shouldn't allow their kids to watch. But I think that's really just a broad question, and ultimately that's for the parents to decide. It's going to be different in each household. I think the better question for today is how. And I know this is something you've written about, and you've written about that in our D6 magazines. How do we teach our children and teens how to watch a movie or TV show through a biblical lens?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were just talking about before the break, which is really engaging your child with conversations. I think that those conversations will sort of allow you to grow into the how, if you will, because I think that's really the key as parents. We can't just say, no, you can't watch this, or yes, this is appropriate. You can do that, because eventually your children are going to be making their own entertainment choices. And so you really need to allow them to age appropriately grow into what we would call good media discernment. And I think that the how is really about engaging your children before and after they watch a movie. Say they want to watch a terrible Adam Sandler movie, for instance. You can sort of bring them along. You can actually sit them down beforehand and say, they say, I really want to watch Hubie Halloween, right? You can sit them down and say, okay, so why do you want to watch this? Let's look at some review sites. You can look at Plugged In, but there's plenty of others out there that you can go through. And I know that parents sometimes actually go through the Plugged In review with their own children to say, this is what is in this. Do you feel like this is appropriate for you? And sometimes actually the kids say no. If you feel like it's appropriate and they feel like it's appropriate, sit down and watch with them. And then afterwards, you can sit down and have a really healthy conversation. When we're talking about Hubie Halloween, it has some definite content issues that we would call out at Plugged In. You know, it definitely has some crass moments, you could say, but it also has some really powerful, good messages. And you can sit down with your child and say, so what did you see in this? Why did you like Hubie? What was a good quality that you saw in Hubie? What made him a hero? You can ask him some of these really interesting questions. And you can tell you don't need to have like an Oscar caliber movie to have these conversations. Most of these movies have a definite story that they want to tell. They have a definite message that they want to convey. And so talking through the story, talking through those messages is so key for moms and dads with their kids.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that it seems like a lot of streaming services have kind of moved to this group watch idea, which doesn't necessarily help the people in the home. But I've already been talking to my dad. My dad lives 300 miles away. I'm thinking, hey, we can watch The Mandalorian at the same time, discuss it after and stuff like that, which I know for teens, children, that's not going to be the same thing, but it works for adults. But I do want to ask, sometimes as parents, we have a tendency to make these conversations really uncomfortable and awkward, so much to the point where our kids never want to have those conversations with us again. Is there a way that we can remove that awkwardness and that uncomfortableness just so that we can have these fun and engaging conversations that are profitable and not just like something that we run away from afterwards?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question. And I will say, Yes and no, quite honestly. I think the earlier that you start engaging with your kids, the better, obviously, because as your kids get used to these conversations, they'll come to enjoy them. But you can also really, as a parent, as you dive into these things, I think that one of the things that kids really recoil from is that your parents are judging you for your entertainment choices, judging you for what you like or what you don't like. If you can, find things that you can legitimately enjoy together. Really embrace, like The Mandalorian is a great example, because I think that has a lot of potential where you can actually really engage with it as a family and really kind of fanboy out as you're dealing with some of the wider themes that you have there. But if you're sitting down with your kid and you don't necessarily like what you're watching, don't get too judgy. You can definitely talk about some of the problematic areas, but first really engage with them, why they like it, what appeals to them about it. You might be surprised what they're actually drawing from some of these stories. I think that's probably a really good way to do it. Don't come across it like this is the talk. It can feel like the talk. Don't come across that way. Just talk about it like you would with a friend, with someone, because that's what we do after we get out of movies, right? We love to talk about what we've seen. Go into your conversations with your kids with that same attitude. You just want to talk about what you've seen.
That's really good. And this is something I've really, now that I'm a parent, I've had to really kind of keep in mind. Now, my son is 2 years old, so we're not having these deep conversations.
Great time to start. Time to start.
Yeah, so his choices in viewing right now are like Coco Melon and Wheel of Fortune. So we're pretty safe. But something I noticed the other day, like the TV was on, and I think like Teen Titans Go was on. Rated TV PG. Other than some, cartoon violence, it was fine. But I also noticed on Sunday night, the new Supermarket Sweep was on, also rated TV PG, and there were words flying around that I do not want his little ears hearing. And I thought, I can't even rely on these ratings anymore. Even at 2 years old, I already have to be discerning about what is going into his ears and what he's seeing, which, even the whole idea of not even having screen time is a big decision right there. But yeah, it's that discernment aspect. It seems like you can't start too early with those conversations and thinking about it because of what the world's throwing at us.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And when we're talking about, it's interesting that you mentioned those TV ratings. One of the reasons that Plugged In exists is because those ratings can be misleading, even in movies. And you have a separate entity that actually reviews movies. So they go through a common filter. With TV, it is all sort of self-judged, essentially. Every network decides whether it's TV PG, TV 14, TV MA, which is sort of the equivalent of an R rating. Because those ratings are ratings that the shows essentially put on themselves, they can be really, really tricky. For the first couple of years, I think The Walking Dead on AMC was rated TV 14, even though it was probably the most violent show that had ever been on TV. So definitely, one help for parents is really checking out some review sites. And I really am not trying to plug my own review site, because there's plenty of great ones out there. Common Sense Media does a great job. But engaging with some of these review sites that actually go in a little bit more in depth with what we see in these movies and television shows and video games even, I think that's an important tool for parents these days, because the entertainment realm is so bewildering.
Yeah. And just kind of like what I was saying earlier, follow up, my wife and I were talking. We noticed the other night that, like I said, Teen Titans Go, Supermarket Sweep, and The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror all had the same rating. Now, there's no way that those all fell under the same categories. But yeah, like you said, TV kind of does what TV wants to do. And we can't just rely on that and let them be the parent. Well, several months ago, Netflix made some headlines for all the wrong reasons when Cuties started streaming, and it caused many to cancel Netflix. Now, I don't necessarily want to talk about Cuties because hopefully by the time this airs, that's a distant memory, but I do want to ask you about our response to things like that. I had many Christian friends that chose to cancel Netflix. I had many who didn't. Now, this certainly won't be the last time this kind of controversy happens. So how can parents navigate these types of decisions, and how can we make them teachable moments for our families?
It's a great question. And I think one of the things we have to remember to do first is take a deep breath before we jump into. I think that just overall, our society right now tends to be one of outrage, where we immediately get very angry about things that we see going on in the culture. And a lot of times we need to get angry about what's going on in the culture. But sometimes I think that we don't take a breath before we really decide what battle is worth fighting for. And when we talk about the controversy with cuties, with Netflix, we have to be aware of a lot of different factors, I think. We have to be aware of the motivation behind the directors, the makers of these movies. We have to be mindful of what Netflix is trying to do. Netflix has some really terrible entertainment out there. There's no question, but they really aim to be sort of this humongous pot that serves up lots of stuff for lots of different people. And so we have to take that into account too. Is it worth boycotting an entity like that, a huge streaming entity, when they also have some really good quality stuff for families too? That's a decision that every family has to make for themselves, because sometimes you really do have to take that stand. But at the same time, when you're boycotting, when you're pushing into that narrative, sometimes you're actually drawing attention to the very thing that you want to have canceled. And that can be a problem of its own.
Well, I want to end with some, we'll have on a little lighter note, some rapid fire, I guess we could call movie shorts, but just some off the wall questions for you, since you're the movie guy. We'll ask some movie related questions. I do want to start, since this is rapid fire, we'll start with a trivia question. Who starred in the 1992 film Rapid Fire?
Oh, I don't know.
That would be Brandon Lee. I did not know either, just happened to see it. I don't think it made very much money. It was Brandon Lee, Powers Booth. Yeah. I think it was in theaters for 5 minutes.
That was before my movie reviewing days were started. So in my defense.
There's a VHS out there floating around somewhere of that film. Okay, enough with the trivia. Here we go with just some questions for you. Fill in the blank. If I have to review another movie with blank in it, I might go insane.
Sacha Baron Cohen.
Oh.
He does some great stuff, though, actually. He's a very good actor. I just, never mind. This is rapid fire. I'll just let that go.
Yes, speaks for itself. What is the greatest animated movie of all time?
Ooh, Up.
Up, okay. I would go with Toy Story 2, but I will take that.
You'd be wrong, but that's fine.
Ouch, okay.
Toy Story 2 is just fine, but Up, oh my goodness. The first 15 minutes, cry every single time.
Toy Story 2 is the highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. So for all the listeners out there, if you're looking for, just kidding. What is the longest movie you've had to review?
Ooh, longest movie or longest feeling movie? I would say that the longest movie I've actually had to review is The Irishman. I sat through 3.5 hours for that. And oddly enough, even though it was a Netflix movie, I saw it at a theater.
Well, apparently you were looking at my notes, because the next question is, what movie felt like the longest but actually wasn't the longest?
Oh, that might be. I would have to say that would be Assassination Nation. It was a very strange movie that came out a few years ago. And it's actually gotten, when you talk about Rotten Tomatoes, it actually was well received, but man, I hated it. It gave the worst messages, and I could not wait to get out of the theater.
Well, probably the most important question I will ask, who is the best Batman?
My default, of course, is Christian Bale. Lately, I've started to have a new appreciation for Michael Keaton in the role. Except that his outfit, he couldn't bend his neck, right? So that made some of the scenes a little bit strange, because if he was looking up into a bell tower, he had to contort his whole body to look. So maybe just because of that, I'd still go Christian Bale.
Okay, and that is the correct answer. We actually would have accepted Christian Bale, Adam West, or Kevin Conroy. So, yes. And finally, since you've seen so many things, are there any films out there that you would recommend that say this would be a good quality family film to watch together? Not necessarily like a Christian film, but just a film that you say, this is a good, wholesome movie that actually does lean towards a biblical view that a family could watch together.
Ooh, that's out right now. That is so difficult because...
Or it could be past. It could be something they could find on Disney Plus or anything like that.
You know what? I am actually going to go back into the archives, and I'm actually going to go back to Pixar and say that one of the best movies that a family can watch together is Inside Out. And the reason is because not only is it a delightful movie, it's super funny in places, but it's also made for parents in a way, because I think that it gives parents a new vocabulary with how to talk through the emotions that their kids are dealing with. You have it's divided into these emotions. You have these islands of different priorities in a child's life. And I think that when you look at Inside Out, it gives parents some potentially great tools that if you see as a family, you can use those tools and talk about, really important stuff with your kids together.
Yeah, that's really good. And now, kind of speaking of that, you do have a new book that's coming out. Is that correct? That deals with depression?
I do have a new book coming out. Yes. It's called Beauty in the Browns, and it really talks about depression. I have dealt with depression for most of my adult life, and it talks a little bit about just how to deal with depression, and just a little bit what it means to be a Christian with depression. Because I think a lot of times in the Christian subculture that we tend to float in, there are people who don't quite know how to deal with it because it seems counterintuitive to the good news, right? We've been given this great hope in Jesus. We've been given this delightful ray of light. And when you're depressed, sometimes it can be hard to feel that hope, to see that light. And that can make us as Christians feel like somehow we're missing the message. What's wrong with us? And so it sort of walks through a little bit of that, as well as gives some practical advice on how to deal with it. And I tell you what, in this time of COVID, more people are dealing with depression than ever before, I think.
Yeah. Well, Paul Asay, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to hear more from Paul, you can check out pluggedin.com, which I check it out probably weekly. This past week, I checked it out for 2 films, and one I said, you know what? Nope, I don't need to watch this. Another one I thought, okay, I think I can go for it. So Plugged In, such a great resource for the church and the family. You can also check out his personal site, paulasay.com. That's paulasay.com. And like Paul mentioned, he has a brand new book coming out called Beauty in the Browns, Walking with Christ in the Darkness of Depression. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Wow, I'm so challenged by his words and his perspective. He has such an interesting job. I think it's so interesting that he sits in a movie theater and tracks the cuss words and the violence and the sexual content. And I just want to say, I'm so thankful for the calling that God's placed on his life and just how it's impacting families for the kingdom. You're doing very important work, Mr. Paul, and I'm very thankful for that. One of the things that he said that I really love is allow your kids to grow into media discernment. I love that. I love that statement. I love that thought. And that's who I want to be as a parent, is I want to help my kids grow in discerning right and wrong when they watch different things.
Definitely. And, he thinks about movies in a slightly different way than the average person would. He will actually look at, not only the obvious. I think he had 3 categories that he wanted to look at in there. But he looked at it with 3 lenses, if you'll remember. Is the movie good? Does it have a Christian message? In other words, is it something that is appropriate with our Christian worldview? And number 3, is it appropriate for the age? And I do think that's really helpful when we evaluate movies, because I think as parents, we can all admit that we remember some pretty good movies when we were younger. And I'll never forget, telling our kids, my wife and I, we kind of gathered our kids to watch this one movie, say, hey, this is a really cool movie. And it wasn't 15 minutes into it, we're like, uh-oh, I didn't remember this about it. And we literally had to turn it off because we forgot how inappropriate a PG movie would be, even for young teenagers. And so I'm thankful that, he's looking at it through those lenses. And then he adds those other nuances like violence and nudity and cuss words and so forth. But again, he's asking the questions that we don't often ask. We tend to just consume. We then have to process, but what are our young minds doing with this? Wow, there's so much coming at our kids. How do we deal with that? How do you, Marianne, Josh? Your kids are younger than ours. The movies are coming at it in totally different areas. Where when our kids were younger, it was typically just TVs and the movie theater that we had to guard against. But it's coming at it in different angles. What are some of the things that you help with on this?
Well, it is, we have to continue to point our kids that Scripture says, the eyes and the ears are the gates to our temple.
Mm-hmm.
Holy Spirit resides in us, and what we invite into our eyes and in our ears and what we listen to and the content that we consume is, it damages, like you said, our brains are a little hard drive. It records all of it. I remember a pastor friend of mine one time, and I do not recommend this approach, but his son was listening to some rap music. It was stuff that was just, and his dad, he was like, Dad, it's no big deal. I'm not going to talk like that. It's on music. I'm listening to it or whatever. And he talked to his wife about this, and the kid was pretty, he was sold on that. Like, I'm not going to do it. So it's okay. It's really no big deal. And so my friend, who was the pastor, got at dinner, and he was a little younger, but he just starts, because he was talking about the degrading to women, and he starts just cussing, like his wife, hey, bring that, all this stuff. And his son is completely stunned. And he's like, Dad, what did you say? Like, why are you talking? And he said, oh, it's no big deal. You said it was no big deal, and it's not something that I recommend, but it's the truth. Like, sometimes we feel like because we're watching it on a screen or it's coming through somebody else is doing it, that it's really, that it's no big deal. And really it is a big deal. Like, it is a big deal. You can watch, violence on TV, but you wouldn't want to see that same violence in your street or in your house, and I think we've almost become desensitized to it. And we need to be having those discussions of how it does affect us.
Yeah. I really liked what Paul said for some parents. Whenever your son or daughter says, hey, I want to go see a certain movie that you already have reservations about, one of his pieces of advice was, he said, come to Plugged In. He said, pull up that movie and read the review, not before you talk to your child, but read it with your child. Read it together and then say, hey, does this sound like something we should want to go see together? I do remember my mom taking me to a movie when I was a teenager, much older teenager. And I'm not going to confess which one it is, but it was way off color. And she was embarrassed to have taken me there. And it would have done a lot for her to have had a chance to have something like Plugged In to review and then say, does this sound like something we would go watch together? There's things I would go watch with my parents, and I think that's a little off, but it wouldn't bug me as much as if my mom or dad were sitting there with me. And I know what our audience is thinking. Well, Christ is always with us. Where is that, his presence in our life making a difference? And that's what we're coaching our kids on when we can read the review together and go, okay, this is how much language it has. This is how much nudity it has. Here's the topics that they're going to deal with or what they're going to allow in there. But I just loved his advice on reading that with your kids.
Yes. I think we have a unique opportunity as parents. We're raising kids in the digital age. And he gave really good practical tips that I feel like that's what we're trying to practice in our house. They have more access than ever. Mm-hmm. Protect your software. I'm just restating what he said. Protect your software, restrict, time limits. And then one of the things that I want to just speak to, this is a passion of mine, just specifically in the ministry work that I do with young women, keep screens in public view. He talked about how back in the day, in our day, you would go to pursue and find pornography, but now pornography finds you. Mm-hmm. And I always say to my girls, and I just want to say it here, that sin grows in the dark and it dies in the light. And when we keep our screens out, I'm raising 2 men, and men are visually wired and geared. And so all screens for everyone, husband, children, me, everybody, all screens are out in the open where there's just this level of light and accountability shining on what we're looking at. And I think parents have a unique opportunity to operate as a unit and formulate a good strategy for protection.
That's right. By the way, we do that in the workplace as well at Randall House and D6 Family Ministry. Every one of the monitors in our organization face the door and face the windows, and almost every one of our offices have windows in addition to windows in the door. And if you walk by somebody's office, you can see their monitors, because most everybody has dual monitors in our building, but it is there for accountability. And I'm hoping that that carries forward into even the home. So it does make a huge difference. So Paul ends with, he and David both end with sharing their favorite animated movies. We talked about our favorite movies. Let's close out this segment with our favorite animated movies. What is your favorite animated movie?
I'm going to go with, and our family got really attached to this storyline, and it's the How to Train Your Dragon series. Like my 13-year-old son, he's going to die when he hears this, but he actually cried in the last one because we just got so attached to Hiccup and the story of, Toothless and just the whole dragon story and how they were connected. And so anyway, that's my all-time favorite animated series is How to Train Your Dragon.
That's awesome. Josh?
It's so hard to pick just one. Yeah, I love the Toy Story franchise so very much. And the 12-year-old boy in me loves cars with everything that I have. Like Cars and Toy Story are probably my 2 faves.
Well, I'm kind of with you, Josh. It's Toy Story or Monsters, Inc. There's just so many quotable lines out of that movie. I just love it. Watching you, always
watching.
That's right. We got to love that. And don't eat the yellow snow. So can't forget those. So anyway, until next week, which we are going to have Elias Dummer. And we're going to be interviewing Elias, and it is a topic that is really unique from the standpoint of worship. And this is such a talented individual, and I know you're going to look forward to. If you like City Harmonic, you'll want to tune in. Let me just leave that little caveat. And check out Plugged In from our guest today. Paul, thank you for your insight. Thanks for challenging us. And as Marianne said multiple times, thanks for what you do, because we appreciate your job, but we don't envy your job. We'll be praying for you. Look for intentional ways to connect to your kids and connect openly with them in the Word and in places like Plugged In, D6 Every Day, other places where you're looking for opportunities to relate to their hearts.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.